I want you to notice something uncomfortable, something you have probably felt for years but never fully named. You live inside a system that constantly asks for something from you. Your time, your focus, your obedience, your identity. You pay taxes with money, yes, but far more often you pay with fear, with attention, with the silent agreement to be who the world tells you that you are. And yet, even when you comply, even when you do everything right, there is a hollow feeling that never goes away. Why is that? Why did Jesus answer a simple political trap with a sentence so strange that it still echoes 2,000 years later? Why does render unto Caesar feel unfinished, unresolved, almost deliberately incomplete? And why has this line been repeated endlessly, yet never used to set anyone truly free? Here is the question no one asks you. What if that teaching was never about politics at all? What if it was a boundary, precise, surgical, drawn between two completely different realms of existence? One that feeds on you and one that cannot touch you? And what if most people, by misunderstanding that boundary, have been giving far more to Caesar than they were ever meant to? There is a second problem, quieter but more dangerous. If you never learn to see this boundary for yourself, you will continue to feel drained, fragmented, and subtly owned, without knowing why. Stay with me, because once this line is seen clearly, it cannot be unseen, and that is exactly why it was never explained to you. To understand what Jesus was really doing, we must step into the historical moment exactly as it was, not as later theology softened it. Judea was under Roman occupation. Taxes were not symbolic, they were instruments of domination. The denarius carried the image of Tiberius Caesar, stamped with his likeness and an inscription declaring him divine. For a first-century Jew, this was not just money. It was an object charged with blasphemy, power, and submission. When Jesus was asked about paying taxes, it was not an innocent question. It was a trap designed to force him into one of two fatal positions: reject Caesar, and he becomes a rebel against Rome. Accept Caesar, and he betrays the spiritual sovereignty of his people. The brilliance of his response lies in the object he requests. Whose image is on it, he asks. They answer, Caesar's. Only then does he speak the line that has been endlessly repeated and endlessly reduced. In the earliest gospel accounts, this moment is tense, almost surgical. Jesus does not praise Rome. He does not endorse taxation. He draws attention to the image, to ownership, to what bears whose mark. This theme of image is ancient and deliberate. In Genesis, humanity is said to bear the image of God. Coins bear the image of Caesar. The implication is not subtle if you are listening with first-century ears. Outside the canonical texts, this language becomes even sharper. In Gnostic writings discovered at Nag Hammadi, Jesus repeatedly distinguishes between what belongs to the rulers of this world and what originates from the Father beyond it. These texts were later excluded not because they were false, but because they were dangerous. They made the boundary too clear. What you are meant to feel here is not clarity yet, but unease. Something vital was said in that exchange, something about image, ownership, and rightful domain. And over time, that something was flattened into a moral instruction about obedience. The question is not whether the teaching was preserved. The question is whether its edge was intentionally dulled. Now we move to the function of the teaching itself, the part that was never unfolded for the masses. When Jesus separated Caesar from what is not Caesar's, he was not negotiating with power. He was exposing a fault line in human consciousness. Caesar represents a system that only operates through symbols, roles, names, and fear. It has no access to your inner being, but it survives by convincing you that it does. The boundary he marked was not external, it was internal. Everything that depends on image, status, legality, and survival belongs to Caesar's domain. It is a constructed reality, maintained by agreement. But there is another domain, one that does not answer to symbols, does not respond to threats, and cannot be taxed, regulated, or owned. That domain is where your true identity resides, and it is here that the system quietly loses all authority. This is why the teaching was dangerous. If people understood that their core self was not a citizen of the world's structures, obedience would collapse from the inside, not through rebellion, but through disengagement. You cannot control what does not identify itself as yours to command. You cannot extract energy from someone who knows what is not required of them. Here is the part most never see. The system does not need chains if it can persuade you to confuse your essence with your role. Worker, believer, sinner, patriot, failure, success. These are all images stamped like Caesar's face on a coin, and the moment you say, "This is who I am," you have crossed the boundary without noticing. If this boundary remains unseen, you will keep offering pieces of yourself, your time, your fear, your attention, to structures that were never meant to receive them. You will feel drained and fragmented, yet unable to explain why. The teaching was never meant to comfort you. It was meant to wake you up to what you have been unconsciously surrendering. To understand how this boundary actually operates inside you, we have to move from meaning to mechanism. Caesar is not only a historical ruler or a political system. Caesar is a field, a collective frequency that trains the nervous system to identify safety with compliance and identity with function. From childhood, this field teaches you who you are by telling you what you must be. Your name, your role, your productivity, your usefulness. Over time, the mind learns to patrol itself. This is how control becomes invisible. The brain synchronizes with the field it depends on. Thought patterns loop around survival, approval, scarcity, and time. Attention is constantly pulled outward, anchored to symbols and expectations. In this state, consciousness narrows. You do not experience yourself as awareness, but as a character moving through a script written elsewhere. This is the operational space of Caesar. It feels normal because it is shared. But there is another mode of perception that operates beneath this conditioning. It does not speak in words first. It observes. It witnesses thoughts instead of obeying them. This is what I call the not Caesar field. It is not mystical in the way people imagine. It is pre-symbolic. It exists before roles, before fear, before the question of who you are supposed to be. And because it does not participate in the exchange economy of attention and identity, it cannot be taxed. When awareness shifts into this field, something subtle but irreversible happens. You still function in the world, but you're no longer fused with it. The system continues to demand energy, but the hook no longer sinks in the same way. Anxiety loses its authority. Urgency weakens. The sense of being owned begins to dissolve, not through resistance but through clarity. This is why most people never cross the boundary, not because it is hidden, but because it requires a withdrawal of identification. And identification is the currency Caesar depends on. Once you see how the field operates, you realize the control was never enforced, it was accepted. And what is accepted can be released the moment it is recognized. Now this shifts from understanding into experience, because a boundary that remains intellectual has no power. I'm not going to give you a ritual, a mantra, or a belief to adopt. Those belong to systems. What I am offering is a moment of direct perception, something you can verify for yourself without anyone's permission. As you listen, bring your attention to the constant movement of thought inside you. Notice how quickly the mind names, judges, anticipates, and defends. Each thought arrives carrying a subtle demand. Respond, fix, worry, prepare. This is the operational language of Caesar. It pulls you forward, outward, into reaction. Do not fight it, simply observe it. Now notice something more delicate. Behind the thoughts, there is an awareness that is already present. It does not argue. It does not rush. It does not need to prove anything. It is aware of the thoughts, aware of the body, aware of the sound of my voice. This awareness is not asking for your energy. It is simply there. This is the side of the boundary that was never explained. Stay with this distinction for a few breaths. Thoughts arise, roles reassert themselves, concerns return, and yet the observing presence remains untouched. Nothing you notice here carries an image stamped on it. There is no name, no demand, no identity being enforced. This is what does not belong to Caesar. The shift happens when you recognize that you do not need to escape the world to stand here. You only need to stop handing over identification. You can return to work, to conversation, to responsibility, while silently rooted in this unclaimed space. Each time you notice the pull to define yourself, to defend an image, to prove your worth, you are seeing the boundary again. This is not a one-time event, it is a skill of recognition. And every moment you choose awareness over identification, you're no longer paying with your inner life. You're present in the world, but not owned by it. This is the moment when many people begin to feel uneasy. not because something is wrong, but because something familiar is loosening its grip. When identification weakens, the structures you once leaned on for certainty begin to feel thin. And here is the truth most teachings avoid. Not everyone is meant to cross this boundary at the same time. Some will hear this and feel nothing. Others will feel exposed, disoriented, even quietly threatened. That reaction is not failure. It is information. If you have spent your life feeling out of place, as though you were participating in a world that never fully made sense to you, this is why. You are not defective. You are less bonded to the field than others. The discomfort you felt was not rebellion. It was friction between awareness and identification. And friction always produces heat before it produces light. This is also why the teaching was neutralized. A population that knows its inner life cannot be claimed is difficult to manage. Such people still function, still contribute, still speak the language of the world, but they are no longer fueled by fear. They do not confuse obedience with belonging. They do not seek validation from systems that cannot see them. There is a quiet loneliness that comes with this recognition. You begin to notice how much of human interaction is built on shared roles and mutual reinforcement of identity. When you no longer need those exchanges to feel real, you may feel separate, even invisible. But this is not exile. It is a return to a more stable ground. What is forming now is not separation from humanity, but a different relationship to it. You are no longer living as a coin in circulation, past, valued and spent. You are something else entirely, something that participates without being consumed. And once this orientation stabilizes, the sense of being drained by life begins to fade. Now there is only one thing left to do, and it is not for me, it is for you. Recognition completes itself through acknowledgement, not belief, not agreement, but a conscious marking of the boundary you have now seen. This is how the teaching becomes lived rather than remembered. I want you to consider quietly where you have been giving yourself away without realizing it, where your attention has been claimed through fear, urgency, or the need to maintain an image. You do not need to judge it. You only need to see it. Seeing is already the withdrawal. If this boundary has become clear to you even for a moment, then you're no longer the same person who began listening. Something has shifted, and it will continue to shift whether you name it or not. But naming it anchors the change. It signals to your own awareness that this recognition matters. If you choose, leave a comment that reflects this commitment. Not a summary, not a confession, but a simple declaration that you have seen the line between what claims you and what does not. This is not for validation. It is a signal to yourself, and to others who recognize it, that you are no longer operating unconsciously. This teaching was never meant to gather followers. It was meant to create witnesses. You can still move through the world, fulfill your responsibilities, and speak its language. But you will do so from the other side of the boundary. And once that line is crossed with awareness, it does not close again.